Night settles over Westeros, where 5 crowns rise and fall like fleeting stars. If these quiet journeys help you drift, feel free to subscribe and share where you're listening from tonight. Now breathe deep. The War of the 5 Kings begins, carried on the wings of ravens. Dusk folds over the 7 kingdoms like a careful blanket. The map dims, the sea hushes, and roofs exhale kitchen heat into the blue. From the haunted edge beyond the wall to the orchards of the Reach, day loosens its grip and night takes the watch. Stables quiet, courtyards empty. In rookery towers, glossy eyes blink and settle. The realm lies whole, but it lies lightly, as if sleep itself knows the bed is about to move. Listen to the names, spoken like lullabies. Winterfell, cool syllables stacked like snow on pine. Riverrun, a low river song gliding under stone. Dragonstone, volcanic consonants warmed by old embers. Pike, salt-bitten, iron-tanged. The sound of wind through knives. Casterly Rock, gold deepened by thundercloud light. The names drift across darkening field like a mother's hand smoothing a child's hair. Somewhere a raven ruffles. Somewhere shutters clasp. Somewhere in the city that calls itself the heart of the realm, a quill drinks ink and begins to draw a thin black road toward morning. King Robert rides because he is Robert, loud as summer, stubborn as the boar he hunts. Ailey and memory make him younger than the mirror would swear. He laughs, he swats at warnings, and the court lets the word only do its ancient trick. Only a hunt, only a boar, only a king who still believes his body will forgive him again. Spears bob like bright reeds, the hounds sing, leaves ripple. The forest prepares the indifferent theater of consequence. Impact is a language without grammar. The boar bursts, the king meets it, and time forgets to climb. Steel is a heartbeat late, then another. Pain arrives like a courier who knows the way too well. When the undergrowth stops shouting, the world returns to its small clocks. Sap tick, fly hum, broken fern. Robert laughs again, thinner now, as if the breath had to borrow passage. He is carried inward while jokes try to defend him. Jokes are poor shields against numbers and blood. In King's Landing, heat leans on the red keep. Inside, the air smells of wax, ink, and dust. Lord Ned Stark, winter in a man's shape, writes as if duty were a straight road and he a traveler who refuses to step off it, even to rest his feet. He has gathered a winter's bundle of proof, one twig at a time, until the load presses his shoulders. Black of hair, brown of eye, seed is strong. He thinks of it the way farmers think of weather, not cruel, not kind, simply what is. His quill moves, the parchment drinks, the letter becomes a bridge he trusts because bridges have always held. Truth builds like snow on a roof. It makes no sound until the beam complains. Ned remembers faces, dark-haired bastards stamped Baratheon, and looks again at the blonde princes who carry a lion's shade rather than a stag's. He loves rules because they allow him to name things cleanly. Now the rule names a crime. He sets counsel to page, every letter a step toward daylight. He sees a saved kingdom the way men see warm beds. He is not foolish. He is faithful to a picture of order that has kept him alive. Elsewhere, a queen watches her children breathe. Cersei Lannister despises the word inevitable. She prefers mine. She prefers arranged. She has built a throne inside silence and dared the world to knock. She is brave as cliffs are brave, until gravity makes its argument. She loves, she insists, and love is a word that can excuse any number of locked doors. Jaime laughs in corridors because he is a joke that believes itself the punchline. The secret that holds their lives sits between them like a chalice no one must spill and no one dares put down. Ravens do not understand the meaning of message. They understand rope, leg, sky. A bird is gentled, the small leather cuff fitted, the note tied. The raven tilts its head as if asking whether ink weighs more than feather. The window yawns, and the dark opens. Wings write a blunt sentence against the evening. The sound is a book closing. The bird goes the way birds go, forward, because distance is simple and destination is not the raven's problem. Roads carry their own prayers. A boy mutters to a roadside god carved to look like wind. A girl lifts her lantern on a footbridge and teaches the frogs to pause. Out in Blackwater Bay, a seam of stormlight blinks like a patient animal. Thunder counts miles the way a mother counts a child's breath. The city presses itself to listen to small things in the narrow, hot dark. And behind those small things, larger things move slowly, not yet wanting to be named. Ned's eyes are pencil-thin with wakefulness. Pages sit around him like sleeping dogs. He hears again. Seed is strong, older than he is, older than the stones. He thinks of his daughters, of honor worn smooth by use, of friends who trusted him with the truth because he looked like a man who could carry it without turning it into a banner. Outside, shutters rattle. Inside, the candle makes an uncertain mouth and then decides to stand. He signs, wax softens, takes the seal, and hardens into cool certainty. He imagines the parchment as a bridge. He does not see rocks rearranging themselves under the water. He cannot hear knives being checked in other rooms, cannot smell oil on bowstrings in other keeps. He hears only the soft scrape of his chair and the faint song of a city turning toward night. This is how inevitability works. It convinces every actor that their part is the peaceful one. Courtyards pale, servants scatter rushes, a dog turns 3 times and commits himself to sleep. Bells lift bronze voices and say the hour. Jaime smiles because boredom suits him better than fear. Cersei tells the mirror what it must already know. Sansa prays like a child who has not been told prayers are bargaining chips. Somewhere a man decides betrayal. Somewhere another decides loyalty is the better story to tell his son. The city is a loom. Night is the thread through every window. Press an ear to the map and hear hinges complain. In the north, the Great Hall breathes and banners remember how to move. In the Riverlands, old wrongs find their walking shoes. On Dragonstone, stone rehearses the taste of fire. On Pike, rope and salt twist themselves into a priest's smile. Beneath Casterly Rock, calculators click in careful hands. No one feels responsible for the tide, yet the tide arrives. Tides grind stone. Men insist they choose. Stones insist otherwise. The rookery is never fully dark. The ravens are never fully silent. Someone is always tying a message to night, trusting wind and wing to finish a thought. The king sleeps at last, paying a red coin under the tongue he tries not to touch. The queen does not sleep so much as stare with her eyes closed. The hand sits with a letter that has cooled. The sea keeps washing its old stairs. Blackwater does what Blackwater does. Tap, tap, tap. The patient finger of the future. Ink dries. Far north, a dire wolf lifts its head as if a sound has reached it from a great distance. 5 tides begin to pull at once. Whisper them softly, so the swords don't wake. Joffrey, a crown balanced on a boy, gleam louder than the head beneath. Stannis, the law's hard edge sharpened against dawn, a blade that refuses to bend. Renly, banners like lanterns, charm poured like wine, a smile sturdy enough to live inside. Robb, the North's young heartbeat, steady, surprising, a drum calling wolves from snow-muffled woods. Balon, the sea's old appetite dressed in iron, a father who loves tides more than suns. They do not share a table, but they share a claim. 1 crown, 5 shadows, 5 hungers. Listen to footsteps entering halls, to maps unrolled, to advisors drawn like moons to 5 new suns. Somewhere a needle is threaded. Somewhere a blade is oiled. Somewhere the sea counts stars like debts. In King's Landing, a sword was unsheathed. Chapter 1. The Spark, Baelor's Steps. Morning leans into noon, noon into afternoon, and the city holds its breath without knowing it. Heat wobbles the sky. Banners swim. Behind a grill of shadow, Petter Baelish smiles the way cats do when the bird never noticed the paw. He has measured the cost of every kindness and the profit in every wound. His whispers skate from ear to ear like flat stones over a pond. When they sink, it is only because the pond has learned to pretend it is deep. Lord Eddard Stark walks with the gravity of vows into rooms shaped like justice and learns they are only rooms. He is tired and hopeful at once, which is the worst combination for this city. Swords here are not only swords, they are punctuation marks, rumors with edges, opinions that don't require sentences. Outside, the bells are lazy with heat. Inside, the trap counts to 3. Gold cloaks move like poured metal, gleaming and heavy. Ned's men feel the miscount a second before the jaws close. Littlefinger, courtly and kind as ever, sets a dagger under Ned's chin as if offering a sweet. "I did warn you not to trust me," he purrs, velvet stretched over wire. It is a line polished for this exact afternoon. Ned is taken, the city pretends to be surprised, and is instead relieved to discover how simple betrayal can look when everyone dresses for it. The Red Keep's cool cells do not comfort. Thoughts arrive like birds at dusk, some startling, some homing, some dropping straight out of the sky for no good reason. Ned counts them, not because counting helps, but because men count when they cannot control. Sansa begs in rooms where her tears evaporate, little silver coins spent into nothing. Cersei listens with the pity one reserves for flames, beautiful, dangerous, bound to go out if starved of air. Joffrey mistakes his own reflection for a crown and considers the world improved. Baelor's square is a stone bowl that keeps sound like water. Word runs faster than feet. The hand will confess. Heat thins. Clouds lean over the bay. A gull on the Sept's ledge pauses to watch. The crowd arrives slowly and then all at once, as storms do, as sobbing does. Sansa waits with eyes that refuse to blink, because the moment might save the man she calls father, if she looks at it correctly. Joffrey sits like a boy trying to be the shape of a king, stiff, angular, craving consequence. Cersei is perfect, a statue someone made of poise and placed beside a creature of impulse. On the steps, with the city gathered in their own clothes and lives, Ned is brought to kneel. He thinks of the North as men think of a bed after too many nights away. He thinks of daughters. He thinks of Robert, loud, foolish, beloved, and how love cannot armor a body against simple arithmetic. He confesses. The words are stones laid down because a bridge was promised. The lie tastes metallic. He says the boy is king. He says he betrayed. He says the North will submit. He says what keeps breath in his chest and his daughter's hands in their sleeves. Fathers are always vast and very small at once. The crowd murmurs, a field of wheat blurred by wind. They sense something wrong, a prickling at the back of the day. The city shivers and calls it breeze. The plan hinged on mercy, a jewel Cersei intended to wear in front of the world, but control slips from the young easily. It runs out between the fingers of those who never learned how to hold it. Joffrey hears himself speak before he decides, because cruelty often pre-exists decision. "Sir Elin," he says, as if ordering wine, "bring me his head." The words are a trapdoor. The square drops. Cersei's surprise is a small white flame. The bells keep tolling the hour, indifferent to meanings that gather beneath it. A blade is a bright, dumb instrument. It does not know what head it takes or what winter it ends. It knows the weight of its own purpose and the angle of its fall. Somewhere in the enormous hush buildings make when the important thing is about to happen, a feather drifts. Somewhere a beggar blinks salt from lashes. Somewhere Arya Stark is yanked from the edge by a man who understands that history is louder when seen from too close. Sansa opens her mouth and loses her voice in the roar. Crowds do what crowds do when scripts are betrayed. They roar, they gasp, they rewrite. Some are horrified. Some are relieved that the worst has finally happened. Some begin to retell the moment a heartbeat after it occurs, shaping it with hands that cannot stop, making stories. The square breathes out and thinks it is done. It is wrong. The realm exhales, wrongly, and breaks. When night finds the corners of the city and unfolds its cool scarf, Baelor's steps, remember, stone keeps heat and history, and both leak slowly. Pigeons return to ledges with a shiver. The sept locks its echoes for morning. Far away, north and west, the rumor rides truer than any letter. The wolf's lord is dead. In Winterfell's hall, under banners that have always been cloth and are suddenly cause, eyes lift and something old stands up in the room, stretches and smiles. In the wolf's halls, banners stir. Chapter 2. The young wolf rises. The north wakes like a bear shaken from winter, slow at first, then with hunger that belongs to bone. Word falls, not snow. It comes as a cold that is not weather. In hall after hall, men with hands like knots and women with iron eyes look at one another and know without being told. The Stark Lord is gone. The hearth feels different. Bread breaks different. Dogs are restless, unsettled by something that has entered the world and refuses to leave. Catelyn Stark travels a road that used to be memory and is now summons. Her steadiness does not require witnesses. She folds grief with the same care she folds cloaks, not because she is cold, but because she cannot afford to spill anything she will need later. Her son is young and suddenly made of stone. Robb's voice changes again, not with age, but with weight that steals childhood and stacks it in the corner for a gentler future that never comes. He calls the banners. The words echo as if the hills themselves had been waiting to repeat them. They gather from barrows and moors and white forests where wind has teeth. They come, their names an old poem sung by Boots, Carstark and Glover, Manderley and Umber, Serwyn and Tallheart. Banners unfurl with sighs. Each sigh is a knot tied. The march south is a line of coals in the night. Songs are quiet and meant for throats more than ears. Boys look older by firelight. Old men look like mountains that have decided to move. The dire wolves pad between tents and teach the night a new shape. To reach the Riverlands, the North must borrow a bridge from a man who hoards insult like coin. The twins stand like stubborn brothers who will not admit the other is right. Walder Frey counts at his table with eyes, fingers, and a puckered mouth. Names, dishes, daughters, advantages. He is not a storm. He is a leak in a roof that insists it is nothing until the ceiling falls in. Catelyn bargains with patient hands. Robb listens and learns how a promise can be tendered as currency and returned later as debt. Under a rag of moon, the Whispering Wood earns its name. Leaves talk, leather sighs. Jaime Lannister, golden and bored, rides certain the world owes him another interesting tale. He finds one. Trees open their secret throats, and northerners pour out like night made into men. The ambush is clean and close and absolutely awake. Horses scream their opinions about surprise. Steel strokes steel and finds it wanting. In the thick of it, Robb Stark moves as if the forest loaned him its quiet. When the horn falls silent, a lion kneels in thongs, and a boy looks more like a king than any crown could make him. River Run is a fortress that remembers being a river first. Stones like wet loaves, towers like cranes. A Lannister noose tightens. Robb arrives with a knife and steady hands. He cuts quietly, not to show skill, but to let his grandfather breathe. The relief is not only military, it is familial. A knot in a throat untied. Banners in the yard lift as wind moves through, and the old lion's roar becomes an old man's sigh. Victories collect, near fords, in fields, along the alleys of memory, where a man chooses to keep moving rather than kneel. They do not end anything. They begin the future's list of reasons to retaliate. War's arithmetic is stern. Robb learns it without complaint. He sends letters that taste like steel to men who used to measure days by weather and grain, now by marches and rations, and the names of villages turn to ash. Yet he is not only numbers. In his tent, by candlelight, he rubs a horse's nose with a boy's hand. that is becoming a king's. He says little to the night. The river keeps doing river things, eating banks, feeding fish, reflecting torchlight like a patient god. Then, one night beneath torches that make every face look honest, the hall fills with the silence that precedes vows. It is not planned by a bard or a court, but it spreads the way a yawn spreads. The great John, half laugh and half fist, calls what every chest is already drumming. The chant is not a chant. It is a decision taught to throats by hearts. The king in the north. The words rise like steam off a river in cold weather and crown the boy without gold, without the Seven's blessing, without anyone's permission but the men who must bleed beside him. Catelyn watches with a mother's two minds, the one that trembles and the one that nods. She knows the price of every crown. It buys a kingdom by spending its king. Robb kneels to no throne. The throne kneels to him because thrones are made of men, and men kneel and rise as moments instruct. In Riverrun's yard under stars that have watched too many coronations to be impressed, a wolf lifts its head and listens to something the human ear will not notice. An old rhythm returning. Lanterns cross fords like patient fireflies. Wolf prints fill and freeze. But in the south, strategy burns green. Chapter 3. The Hand of the King at Night. King's Landing. By day is a market of boasts. By night, a ledger whispered in rooms that pretend not to listen. Tyrion Lannister inherits the dark hour and prefers it. The city without its noise is a chessboard lit by braziers, its pieces pretending to be furniture. He pours wine, keeps the cup shallow, and his wits full. Shae is a candle he should have snuffed and carried away. Love and pride are poor readers of hazard. He protects her by hiding her in the open secret of a small life. They make a pocket of laughter inside a city that runs on contempt. It is not wise. It is human. Humanity loses often, yet wins the occasional thing that makes losing bearable. Between maps and arguments and small wars without banners, he visits her and remembers he is not only a Lannister, he is a man who likes being understood. Varys moves through Tyrion's nights like a silk rope, soft, reliable, without knots that show. He is rumor's favorite uncle, smiling as if secrets were kittens he fosters until they become dangerous. Birds bring truths that sound ridiculous until set beside the day's events, when absurdity reveals itself as accuracy in costume. Tyrion listens like a gambler to dice skittering across wood. He cannot see the numbers, but he can hear luck. Cersei runs the Daylight Kingdom on fumes of rage and incense of certainty. She feels Tyrion as an ache in a tooth. He smiles with the infuriating softness of someone unimpressed by threats because he has measured his life against worse. Joffrey punctuates the family dialogue with squalls. No one reasons with squalls. You reef what you can, ride it, clean up, and reset the table. Tyrion discovers that ruling is mostly arranging chairs, so the worst men cannot sit where they like. He descends to the Alchemist's Guild as a careful man approaches a pyre, slowly, respectful, ready to leap. The old order wakes for him, sleepy and delighted to sing its dangerous lullaby. Wildfire sleeps in green glass like a bottled forest, patient, terrible. The hall smells of copper and old spells, and men who outlived fashion. The pyromancers boast of quantities and historical tragedies. Tyrion nods like a man choosing bread for supper while counting barrels, exits, distances, and fears. He accepts their pride, then adds his plan to it like a governor on a fire. In the dungeons, the city's true thermometer, he has chains measured, links tested, lengths tallied, as if they were poems. He rehearses disaster until it becomes choreography. Fires set like punctuation in the river's sentence. Ships turn from rescue to tinder. The enemy invited closer so the bloom will matter. He confers dignity on waiting by giving it a purpose. If defense must wait, it can still be clever while it does. Pieces move. Janos Slint discovers promotion pointing north. The city watch is rebuttoned so it closes under Tyrion's hand rather than his sister's. Council chairs are rearranged as if furniture were fate. With Bronn, he speaks a language that respects edges, coin, and clarity. He does not romanticize the sellsword. Therefore, the sellsword does not lie to him. In a city of flourished lies, two men who prefer plain words become almost invincible at night. On ramparts where wind brings tar and tide, Tyrion looks downriver and thinks like a smith. What is steel without fire? What is courage without a plan? He is not tall. The wall is very tall. The drop preaches humility. He listens, then risks. Behind him, Sansa grows thorns in silence. Ahead, Stannis sharpens law on the whetstone of faith. Tyrion stands between charm that will not save them and righteousness that will not spare them, and chooses the third thing: preparation. Nights stretch like wire. Braziers burn low and red. His room is a chaos of notes, crumbs, and failures he has not yet had time to make. He writes orders as if words could become spears if angled correctly and given to the right hands. He wakes to his own handwriting. He sleeps inside sentences he does not finish. The city begins to feel less doomed, more prepared, and preparation lends even frightened sleep a softness it does not earn. He makes an altar to practicality: stacked parchments, sealed jars, a map pricked with pins that do not bleed and therefore cannot be bribed. He knows his sister plays with matches. He resolves to play with water. He dreams green light and wakes with copper on his tongue. He tells no one, because leaders are not allowed to be haunted unless the haunting rhymes with heroism. Everything he does is small, which is why it works. He does not seek one great moment to define him. Great moments are greedy and often demand a body as the receipt. He seeks 100 small moments that admit they are servants. He speaks softly into the city's fabric. In return, the city hums when he touches it, a harp recognizing its player. Stores move closer to hands that will use them. Men who must be bribed are catalogued. Men who must be watched are moved. Men who must be avoided are thanked and sent hunting elsewhere. Wildfire dreams its green dream in glass. The city sleeps in short fits, as the sick do. On nights when the bay breathes into the streets, Tyrion stands at a window and lets salt wash dust off his mind. The moon sketches a thin smile on the water. Oarsmen practice without moving oars, hands tightening, relaxing, rehearsing fear. Tyrion lifts his cup to the idea that planning is love wearing a helmet. He does not pray. He plans. He does not prophesy. He prepares. He does not wait for courage to arrive in romance. He stitches it out of practical cloth and wears it under his shirt where no one can see and therefore no one can steal. The city will burn, he thinks, but it will burn on his terms, and from that fire something like safety will grow, not because fire is generous, but because he will arrange it. Across the narrow sea's edge, a hard law sharpens. Chapter 4. Dragonstone's Claim. Stannis and the Letter of the Law. Dragonstone rises from the sea like memory the world refuses to forget. Black jackets sculpted into beasts that breathed a different age. In its halls, fire is scripture. Stannis Baratheon walks those halls as if they are lines in a book he has decided never to skip. His face is not a mask. It is a verdict. He loves rectangles, the straight edge of reason, the square corner of duty, the frame of a rule that does not wiggle when a queen smiles. He reads law the way other men read weather. He sees storms before they arrive, not by magic, but by maps. Succession is a road. Roads do not bend for tears. When his brother's death lifts him into a corridor that leads to a throne, he does not hurry or decorate the corridor. He walks. He expects the door to open because doors, in his world, obey the hinges that were built for them. Even Stannis, whose blood runs on rails, feels the tilt when he looks at the Queen's children and sees strangers to the seed that should have made them. He does not say destiny. He does not say fate. He says fraud. The word tastes medicinal. He writes letters like catapult stones, high arc, sure landing, to lords who suspect, to lords who do not want to suspect, to lords who would rather not read. He writes to remind the realm that a crown is a contract, not a costume. Sir Davos Seaworth has known prisons and storms and the price of choosing the wrong cargo. He reads Stannis with the love reserved for truths that do not flatter. He is a plain man whose honesty is not naive but practiced. He rows when the wind is against him. He eats bread in patience when the tide will turn. He stands at Stannis' side, not because Stannis is lovely, but because Stannis is loyal to something larger than himself. And in a starving world, loyalty to law is food. Melisandre arrives like a red silk road rolled over snow. Her certainty heats Stannis' colder certainties until they look like flame. She speaks the grammar of fire and shadow. The grammar persuades because men want to be chosen by gods, and Stannis wants to be chosen by rules. And those hungers kiss in him like twins who can not agree. Who is older? She brings a story in which Stannis is not merely correct, but necessary. She brings a god who prefers answers that burn. On Dragonstone's wind-whipped stairs, the tide taps stone like a patient visitor at a door. Candles, gutter, even light must learn obedience. Stannis listens to Melisandre because listening is not surrender, it is data. He tests her words against the iron bars of his mind. He dislikes poetry unless it hardens into law. Yet he cannot ignore what the Red Woman shows. The world is colder and wider than ledgers, and there are wars our honest statute cannot fight without strange allies. Before shadows, before leeches and names tossed to flame, there are letters. Each raven learns a single sentence. Joffrey is no true king. The script is tight, unadorned, without plea. Stannis asks nothing, he states. The realm blinks and pretends it did not see. But men who did sums at their fathers' tables cannot unsee arithmetic. The seed is strong. The seed did not flower. The law is awake. Renly blooms in the south. Green silk, apples, laughter, tents that glow like lanterns. Stannis watches his younger brother's easy war with what others call jealousy, and what is in him, fury at arithmetic being mocked by a parade. Why should charm count as coin? Why should men choose a smile over a statute? Why should songs balance ledgers? He understands only this. When rules break, empires crack at the corners and let in something colder than winter. Davos tries to soften the furniture. He suggests allies who demand patience, ships that must be mended, men who must be convinced before they are counted. Stannis nods. He is not deaf. He simply privileges the sound of duty over the hum of budgets. He will pay what must be paid. If the coin is blood, he will spend it and defend the receipt. In the chamber of 100 flames, each reflected in polished obsidian, Melisandre speaks of a war larger than thrones, a quarrel between light and night. Stannis hears and steers back to garrisons and grain, because he does not know how to fight the wind, only the men it moves. She smiles without condescension. Fire does not require agreement to be fire. It will burn what it can reach, and she intends to extend its reach, with him at the spear point. At night, Stannis stands on a parapet and looks toward King's Landing, like a surveyor eyeing a line he intends to make real. The sea is a rug he will not trip on. The sky is a ceiling too far to care. He rests his hands on stone that sweats salt. In the rhythm of tide, he hears not comfort but schedule. Ships must be readied, sails mend, men paid or punched. Letters must go again because the world forgets in sun what it learned under moon. If Stannis was softer, he might envy Renly's camps, music, dumplings, tents buoyed by laughter. Envy is a flavor he does not taste. He eats plain bread, righteousness, and drinks endurance, calls that supper, and returns to sums in the morning. The grammar of crowns remains what it always was in his book. Birth, legitimacy, duty, endurance. Power is not a fruit you pluck. It is a tree you are asked to water even when drought makes you look foolish. From Dragonstone's quays, fishermen row at dawn with acceptable anxiety. Stannis watches sometimes, not sentimental, but recognizing in their strokes a version of his faith. You row because rowing is required. You return because you returned yesterday. You trust the math of oar and tide and hull. He intends to row to the throne. He intends to row even if the river is fire. If a god helps, fine. If not, the oars will still bite water. In the candlelit map room, a wooden stag stands sentinel over the painted world. Stannis sets a finger on King's Landing and presses until the knuckle whitens. He rehearses no prayer, no speech. He rehearses compliance. The city's compliance with rules that built it and keep it from being a strong thief's idea of property. Law is not warm. It is not friendly. It is not a mother, but it is awake, and he serves what is awake. He sends more letters. He calls banners. He studies the narrow black seam of the bay and imagines sails crowding it like teeth. But a peach ripens in the Stormlands. Chapter 5. The Green King, Renly's golden camp. Tents like lanterns dotted the Stormlands, little suns under silk, humming with song and roast and rumor. In Renly Baratheon's camp, war pretended to be a festival. Banners were garlands. Kettles laughed. Lute strings stitched the night together while the wind smoothed creases from bright pavilion walls. Men slept with their boots neatly beside them and woke thinking victory had already chosen its groom. Renly moved through this pageant as if born from applause. He knew the miracle of the light touch, a hand on a destria's brow, a word to a baker, a remembered name for a minor knight. He made 1,000 small kindnesses spend like gold. The Tyrell bloom wrapped him in a green fortune. Grain, horses, armorers, who could lace a breastplate so it felt like pride. Charisma was his banner. The reach made it bread. 2 figures gave the camp its edge. Sir Loras Tyrell was soft steel, graceful, perfumed, and dangerous wherever the eye forgot to look. Brienne of Tarth was steadfast stone, towering, plain, unshakably turned toward the good she had found. If Loras was moonlight on a blade, Brienne was the cliff from which a blade breaks. They orbited Renly with different gravities, one polishing his shine, the other guarding his life with a promise that did not advertise itself. Catelyn Stark came as envoy and winter. Lanterns rimmed her face in warm light, but could not change its lines. Renly welcomed her with cheer that made men nearby straighten as if praised. She asked for patience and union. She asked the warm camp to consider cold distances, north, winter, the debts owed to dead fathers. Renly listened, smiling, and answered with hope's grammar. We will be many, we will be merry, we will win, and then decide how to share the songs. Then Stannis arrived, a drawn line across Renly's green circle. He brought no music and accepted none. His face was a rule. His voice was flint clicking for spark. Where Renly offered warmth, Stannis offered weight. The brothers met under tall canvas. Guards held still, and the camp leaned in the way a field leans to storm. Their duel was words. Stannis set the law like an anvil and demanded true blows upon it. Joffrey is no true king. Birth is a contract. Oaths are rails. The realm must return to the track or wreck. Renly set joy like a standard and dared the world not to march beneath it. Men follow bread and laughter, he said, and a king who can fill their tables will rule their hearts. Catelyn listened between them, a harbor that could not make 2 ships choose the same wind. Bend, Stannis said, meaning restore right order. Join, Renly said, meaning let happiness carry us to victory. Loras's eyes flickered like a fuse. Brienne waited like a locked door that trusted its hinges. No pact came. Law will not bow to merriment. Merriment cannot kneel to law. The brothers parted with the promise that one would soon make the other irrelevant. Night settled soft as down. Inside Renly's pavilion, the candles made a golden moat. Guards traded small jokes about breakfasts. Servants checked buckles for morning parades. Marjorie, precise and calm, adjusted a wick so the light would flatter the silk. Renly unbuckled his sword and set it aside with the contentment of a man life had taught to expect more life. Loras, bright and restless, paced. Brienne stood at the edge like a prayer done without words. Trouble came without footsteps. The candle flames leaned as if a door had opened onto a colder room no one could see. A shape darker than dark crossed the light and kept its outline even while fire retreated. It wore a man's purpose and a man's height. It made no claim to a man's soul. Brienne stepped forward, oath moving her feet faster than thought. Loras gasped a name. Renly half-turned, searching for the jest that would banish unease like smoke. There was no jest. What happened was quick and narrow, a line drawn through a day that had expected to be round. Silk whispered. Metal ticked on stone. Breath left the tent as if the pavilion itself had been struck. The king who turned worry into warmth became a story men would tell about how quickly a song can end. The candles guttered, then steadied, and found no one to flatter. Grief in a festival silences song with shocking efficiency. Outside, the camp still smelled of apples, rose oil, and roast. Inside, it smelled of wax cooling too fast. Brienne knelt into a life that had failed a trust and gathered it in her arms as if the past might be convinced to return. Loras broke like delicate glass no one had realized was load-bearing. Catelyn did the only work left to the living. She turned shock into motion, survival into a plan. She pulled Brienne up with a voice that made obedience feel like mercy and got them moving, out, away, alive. Word ran like spilled wine. Torches trembled. Knights who had slept like boys woke like widowers, clutching at nothing and finding orders instead. Dawn put pale hands on the tents. Nothing had moved and everything had changed. The Tyrell bloom, so quick to laughter, adjusted to arithmetic with ruthless efficiency. A summer sun had been snuffed by a winter method, and the camp learned new weather. Songs flickered, then went out. The green banners still breathed. Slower, a patient drifting. One slipped lower on its pole and stayed there, slumped like a closing eyelid. Somewhere a harp paused, uncertain. Somewhere a cook blew out a flame and wept in silence. Storm's End keeps its watch for the last time. Chapter 6. Keys of the Riverlands. The Riverlands are a harp strung with fords and bridges, and the Lannisters plucked until the music snarled. Robb Stark learned the tune and its counter-melody. Strike, vanish, free a keep, refuse to own the ruin. War, there was a lesson in locks, each with 2 keys, blood and bread. At the Golden Tooth, the hills squeezed the road like a miser. The lion had claws in the choke. Robb spent night, fog, and fear instead of boys. Small hands set small fires where big eyes would see them. A patrol walked into smoke and did not come back. Rumor crossed a ridge faster than horses. The tooth loosened, not broken, but uncertain of its own bite. Supply is the quiet war inside the noisy one. Lannister trains snaked east under banners of dust. Wolves padded at their flanks and bit where sound was weakest. A wagon left behind for a complaining wheel seldom rejoined its line. Grain grew damp, then absent. Harried captains wrote pleasing numbers in place of news. Robb read those numbers as confessions. He pressed where pride posted bright guards and slipped where accountants posted tired ones. It made no ballads. It turned enemy mornings into double checks and enemy suppers into half meals. When Tywin thrust east, Robb pinched north and south. When Tywin withdrew, blood followed like a reluctant thought. Victories arrived as dusk arrives, quiet, then suddenly everywhere. A standard curled against a tree as if sleeping. A river crossing no longer took a toll. A squad rode home through the wrong village and found it was not theirs. Riverrun breathed easier, but breathing is not feasting. Smoke still combed the horizon. Catelyn rode between war and custom, her saddle a tribunal. Walder Frey had loaned a bridge and presented a bill written on daughters and dinners. Oaths inked at night can read differently at noon. Parchment remembers the quill. She spoke to Robb as counselor and mourning bell. Honor is bread until it is a stone. Letters went to the twins wrapped in silk and weighted with lead. Walder answered with the long patience of mold. He would be paid in time, and time is the one currency generals spend without consent. Catelyn counted futures and found too few with smooth roads. Meanwhile, the wolves learned the lion's sleeping habits. A messenger expected at dawn arrived at dusk with a bruise instead of a report. A veteran who knew 3 good crossings remembered a 4th and found Robb waiting with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Captives told truths no rack could find simply because kindness set chairs and asked better questions. Yet cost wrote its own column. For every clean success, a letter went north and a chair stayed empty. Karstark sharpened grief on available throats. The Great John laughed loudly and drank more quietly. Young lords rode with 2 maps, one on the table and one in the chest. Robb slept when sleep allowed and dreamed of gates that did not ask for names. News from home drifted like snow that would not melt. Winterfell had been touched by hands that did not love it. Theon Greyjoy's letters tasted of salt and speed. Robb set his jaw and turned pain into another task. He pushed again along the river quays, not to reach a throne, but to buy time for a hearth. He knew Lannisters did sums in gold and fear, so he made fear expensive and gold slow. A column that thought itself safe found a ford no longer shallow. A sally that believed itself clever met brambles where there had been grass. Night riding became prayer. Let the horse step true. Let the enemy sleep one more hour. Let the fog keep telling our lies. The Riverlands are a country of mothers. Even the stones look like they once held something. Robb rode through hamlets that had learned quiet and gave away food that could not be spared, because someday the North would need a friend. He was too young to be this tired and too stubborn to be this young. He sent ravens to men who could count and asked them to count compassion too. Some did. Some sealed their pity and called it policy. Drizzle dulled heraldry to a soft gloss. Hooves found moss and made less noise. War grew muffled as if the land had put a finger to its lips. Victories stacked like careful plates. Lovely, breakable. Tywin advanced, retreated, advanced again, like a man whose rooms no longer felt arranged. The lions were unsettled. The wolves were undefeated. The board was messy, not decided. Catelyn returned from parley with rain in her hair and a treaty's outline folded into thought. The price of crossing had been named long ago by a man who counted children in columns. The Frey toll hung over every plan like a beam no one trusted. Robb nodded and chose courage that looked like patience. He would pay later because now demanded now. He did not know how exact the ledger would become. Drizzle thinned to mist. Men cleaned edges with wool and sang little songs to keep their hands awake. A boy whittled a flute and made the saddest tune sound almost hopeful. War did not end. It learned a slower tempo and asked the living to dance carefully. The river kept time. Somewhere a ferryman counted coins twice. Somewhere a miller swept ash from his doorstep. And somewhere a widow set 2 bowls anyway, out of habit, for hope. On the Iron Islands, old gods whisper of salt. The sea prays insult, not words. It kneels by grinding, rises by habit, and counts victories in wrecks. Out on the Iron Islands, cliffs drink spray and give back only silence. The drowned god accepts no candles. His worship is breath surrendered and retaken. Nets gleam with scales like coins. Rope burns hands into maps of obedience. Pike lifts from water like knuckles. Its halls remember storms better than songs. Salt wives sing threading lullabies through hammering surf. In the docks, men fix oarlocks and lie about distances. The priest's voice is a wave-turned sermon. What is dead may never die, rise colder, like winter steel. A long ship noses in, and the shore measures the stranger by the way he steps from plank to rock. His coat remembers other courts. His smile is a city habit. He calls this keep home and tests the word. Father looks like a verdict. Sister looks like a knife. Old gods look like the sea itself, uninterested in apologies. The gulls approve nothing. They attend. Tide comes without debate. Between foam and iron, a test begins. A boy becomes a prince in borrowed skin. Chapter 7. Theon Greyjoy and the False Homecoming. Sea spray needled. Theon Greyjoy's cheeks as the longship nosed to Pike. He smiled with a court-bred mouth. The rocks did not smile back. Home was a borrowed cloak, warm if no one tugged. He stepped to the dock with a city gate, and the island measured him wanting. Pike's halls remembered the pledge boy, not the man. Balon Greyjoy's eyes were winter that denied spring. Stark, he said, as if the name were rot. Theon tried father and received an audit of soft hands and southern coin. Asha laughed with half an embrace and named him boy anyway. The priest drowned him by ritual and returned him thinner, stamped with salt. The Isles spoke iron. Theon mistranslated with finery and boasts. He praised letters. Balon praised ships. "We do not sow," the banners hissed, and the old man meant to prove it. Strike the green coasts while the north marched. Take harbors, burn roofs, teach shepherds smoke. Theon begged for glory and was handed lesser keys. Pride decided they opened greater doors. In sleep, he walked Winterfell's warm corridors. Bread, furs, a brother's grin. He woke to gulls that sounded like knives, and a father's voice sanded thin. Duty changed clothes on him overnight. He put on iron and tried to mean it. Along the stony shores, iron men learned his measure by risk, not pedigree. They wanted loot. He wanted a coronation in a frown. Coastal villages learned old hymns of splintered doors. Theon spoke bold orders in Robb's cadence and hated hearing it. He argued with two ghosts, the wolf who had called him brother and the kraken who demanded a son he could not fully be. Moat Cailin glittered in his mind like a choke in a throat, but the bog laughed and the stones kept their secrets. Pride, wounded, searched for an easier neck. In Balon's salt-stinking hall, he stabbed a ragged chart. "The north is empty," he said. Asha pointed where boats would return fat. She teased Theon while testing him. Captains weighed him like meat, ready to pay if he bled for it. Winterfell stood unwatched, in fact, and golden in memory. Maester Luwin's remembered counsel drifted. Mercy binds, prudence holds. Theon answered ghosts with heat, prayed to trees that would not hear, and returned to make a speech that sounded right and felt wrong. He took the castle with trick and door. He sat with borrowed swagger on a stolen chair. The hall warmed him and then refused to keep him warm. Bran and Rickon slipped away like water through wicker. Rage sought substitute. Fear demanded proof. 2 miller's boys and a terrible arithmetic supplied it. After the miller's boys, he expected armor to grow from shame. It did not. Fear made him loud. The north stared back. Ironborn counted exits, crowns made without love slip. Robb loomed like weather, and no road back remained. News is a tide with knives. Theon's deed returned on the lips of men he needed. Reavers measured him with butcher care. Servants kept eyes on floors and ears on wind. He shouted because silence frightened him. He wore more fur because the hearth went cold. He slept less because dreams prosecuted better than any lord. Letters went out regal, desperate, in turns to Robb, to Balon, to anyone who could untie a knot without calling it folly. No answer arrived that wasn't a blade. The battlements he had walked as a protected boy were indifferent under a self-invented lord. Stones do not care. They have weathered kinder boys and crueler. When rescue came, it wore a flayed man and a smile that missed the eyes. Ramsay Snow offered physicians mercy, removing patient from disease and disease from its name. Theon opened gates to a solution with quiet feet and sharp teeth. A rescue became a second siege. Winterfell learned what kind of fire can live under snow. Smoke taught crows a new map. Timber sighed like old men. Theon discovered how quickly a self unbuilds and renames. Reek is a word that molds flesh and thought together. Called it, he began to forget where the stink ended, and he began. Far off, a dire wolf lifted its head toward an empty hearth. The north did not forgive or rage. It remembered slow and heavy, pointing memory at the boy who had come home in another's coat. Winterfell's stones dropped their warmth and would not give it back. Theon, who wanted Kraken and Wolf, became neither, only a lesson men repeated over ale with voices lowered. Sea spray still needled, now from memory. He had unlearned how to stand where he stood. In castles and on cliffs, his name hid in corners. The tide kept arriving. It brought neither the boy he had been nor carried away the man he made. The gull cried once. The old gods whispered nothing. Some nights he stood above the gate and tried to name a single moment where a different word might have saved him. A door not opened, a jest not spoken, a letter sent sooner, a hand placed humbly on a banister. But the list would not end, and the night did not answer. Only the sea kept time, and it kept it for itself. He was smaller than the tide now. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, the sea itself will burn. Chapter 8. The Blackwater, Night of Green Fire. Drums spoke across dark water, thick and patient, counting courage in other men's chests. The oarsmen matched them without seeing shore, and King's Landing held its breath as if the city had only one lung. On the walls, helms made a row of moonless domes. Under them, eyes watered from pitch smoke and worry. Tyrion Lannister felt the old city settling its weight on his small shoulders and refused to shrug. He steadied his breath twice. Tonight, calmly. Stannis' fleet came like a moving forest, masts a black grove, sails a silence that covered the bay. He had sharpened law into a spear and now meant to throw it at a city that preferred knives. Tyrion's defenses were chores finished well. Chains laid, stores checked, men bribed, moved, replaced. He trusted small work to grow teeth at the right moment. He could see his sister's appetite for spectacle and his nephew's for cruelty, and chose neither. He would survive by arranging physics. On the river, a single ugly ship drifted like a mistake left out by a sleepy quartermaster. "Come closer," the city breathed. The ugly ship bobbed, patient as a lie. Stannis' van swept toward it under a moon that had decided to mind its business. Archers knocked. The first stones staggered through the air and beat the water into clumsy hills. Somewhere on a quiet signal, a lantern lifted. Somewhere else, another answered. The wind turned its head, curious. The bay learned a new color. Wildfire bloomed. It opened like a throat and sang. Green caught the world by both cheeks and kissed hard. The first ship cheered flame to the next, and the next, until the bay looked like a garden planted by a god, with a cruel sense of humor. Smoke climbed and petals fell, sparks drifting like stars who had forgotten where to live. Men screamed the way rope snaps, sharply and then not at all. The hound, who had looked down on fear as if it were a small dog with a too loud bark, found it suddenly taller than walls. Fire is a language he does not speak without stuttering. He left the gate because there are limits even to great men's contempt. In the yard his breath sounded like a forge. Beyond the yard the green sang the old word for no. Later songs would call it cowardice. Tonight it was a human body refusing to walk into a mouth. The city roared and then gagged on its roar. Bells clanged half prayers, half warnings. The mud gate coughed men and swallowed them back. The chain came up inch by inch, a long hidden jaw shutting upon the bay. Stannis' rear pressed his van forward into the trap. The current obliged. Tyrion watched numbers turn traitor to the side that had counted them most faithfully. Amid the green and iron, there remained the business of men on stone with steel. Ladders thumped, grapnels bit. Stannis' soldiers made a bridge out of courage and fell off it by the dozen. King's Landing met them with rocks and fire and the household inventories of desperate people. Pots, stools, boiling fat. A prayer or two yelled like insults. The fight tightened until nothing fit between blade and bone but breath. Tyrion went where leaders are supposed to, forward far enough that fear could see his face. His axe was an argument that did not require eloquence. He shouted small directions and one large sentence, "Follow me." Some did because orders, some because shame, some because he was the only person visible who seemed to know what this hour wanted. He bled and kept going. Somewhere in that green noon, Sir Mandon Moore cut the air at Tyrion, and the air bled. Betrayal is a private heat. The boy Podrick thrust, as if he were poking a stubborn fire, and found a throat. Tyrion's vision filled with red that did not glow, and then with black that did. He toppled into a city he had been holding up, and for a moment both considered falling together. Lantern light bowed to distance. Voices echoed with the peculiar clarity of rooms one is leaving. Elsewhere, Stannis was a storm that believed no harbor could deny it. He pushed boats into fire and men into ladders until ladders broke and boats were candle stubs. He drove his will up the steepers and heard it crack against the stone shape of a place that had decided not to belong to him tonight. He did not stop, because stopping is what law does not do. He simply ran out of night. At dawn, the green lay thin on the water, an aftertaste rather than a meal. Tywin Lannister arrived like morning, pretending to be salvation. Banners crisp, horses clean, men who had not sweated the night tasting easy victory. The Tyrell roses opened politely to the sun and to the lion's thanks. The city, which had been hours from a new name, learned to purr again on command. Tyrion woke to pain and the shape of a scar that would follow him like a new title. The city forgot how close it had come. Forgetting is how cities live. The bells rang for triumph and drowned other bells that remembered screams. Varys counted birds. Cersei pretended she had always intended the result. Sansa prayed and learned a different verse of her prayer. Stannis stared at a horizon that had lied. Victory is a crown of thorns. Chapter 9. Aftershock. Roses and lions. Victory smells better than survival. King's Landing put on clean clothes and pretended the night had been a story told to children for discipline. Tywin rode through the gates in sunlight and acquired credit for darkness he had not seen. The city bowed to spectacle. Roses opened in the heat. The small folk learned to say the word deliverance with a straight face. The Tyrells entered like a breeze with pockets. Grain wagons rolled and gardens rose where courtyards had been bruised. Marjorie Tyrell walked the corridors with calculation disguised as charity. Her kindness had handles, easy to grasp, difficult to refuse. She spoke to orphans, smiled at soldiers, and let affection look like policy. To the small folk, she felt like mourning. To Cersei, she felt like debt. Court, newly stabilized, became a soft trap. Music returned to the solar. Embroidery returned to laps that had clenched around fear. A calm was curated, not earned, precise as an herbalist's work. Sansa Stark drifted through this museum of safety like a sleepwalker. The city had not broken her, only pressed her very thin. Littlefinger approached as perfume approaches, present before you can say yes or no. He had a nose for the soft corner in any fortress and found Sansa's, the part that still believed in stairs leading up rather than down. He offered pictures, ships, lemon cakes, promises with ribbons, a careful rescue arranged between syllables. He never said the word cage, only described the door. Sansa listened because hope is a habit and because the alternative was to stop listening forever. Varys watched. His birds returned with seeds of tomorrow. He kept two ledgers, what men wanted to hear and what the realm needed to remember. To Tyrion he brought receipts of ingratitude. To Sansa he brought, sometimes, a silence that sounded like advice. Cersei, forced into grace by arithmetic, smiled the way a blade glints. Marjorie called her sister and offered partnership where hatred might be loud enough to attract ears. The lioness measured the rose and found thorns she had not planned for. Joffrey, briefly dimmed by a purple fear he could not name, recovered his taste for spectacle. Announcements rang. Betrothals threaded like garlands. The court learned new choruses. Tyrion's scar healed into a permanent reminder that the city liked him best when he was not visible. He learned where thanks go to die. Chairs forgot who had placed them. He drank less than men assumed and read more. He constructed disguises made of boredom and survived beneath them. Sansa wore a gilded kindness the way a bird wears a net it hardly feels, until wind proves otherwise. Marjorie's sympathy was real and strategic. Cersei's attention was sharp and conditional. Littlefinger's escape routes glittered, then vanished when inspected closely. The girl learned to laugh precisely, to say nothing that would be remembered and everything that would be admired, to contain an ocean in a teacup and call it sweet. In gardens made new, Tyrell and Lannister plotted over figs. Olenna's needles pricked without drawing blood. She hemmed futures while men boasted about the cloth. Tywin measured gratitude in coin and leverage. The marriage game rearranged the board faster than arrows ever could. Alliances set like jams in summer, sticky, sweet, and likely to ferment if not eaten promptly. The realm smiled because smiling is cheaper than rebuilding. Out in the riverlands the cost continued. Burnt beams and empty wells, villages that would cook again when they had a pot, a field, and a reason. Inside the city, scribes wrote order. The faith polished its altars and prepared to be indispensable. The crown counted debts in units of decades. Varys's whispers about the north arrived wrapped in frost. The Starks were unseated but not undone. The Boltons were promoted without being loved. Theon's misdeeds had opened doors that cold men would now walk through politely. Sansa, hearing slivers of this from servants who had learned how to gossip safely, did not let her face change. Her hands practiced stillness until the habit grew permanent. Gifts ran, loaves, shawls, flowers. Marjorie visited the sept and let piety decorate her voice. The small folk kneaded gratitude into superstition. The young king became a symbol. Cersei ground her teeth and then learned to grind others. Tywin pretended boredom and meant control. Littlefinger kept offering exits disguised as detours. He never offered a map. He offered a horizon. Sansa learned to translate the part of his smile that told the truth from the part that invited ruin. She kept a corner of hope wrapped like a sweet. From a balcony, she saw a road that could begin or end with one step. In council, marriages were debated like sieges, grain like armor. The Tyrells spoke lightly and won heavily. The Lannisters spoke heavily and kept winning. Between them, the city learned to dress sharp and count fingers after every handshake. At night, the gardens were fog and perfume, and the soft click of planes. The city lay down with its makeup on. Dreams came, tidy and trimmed. But the earth under the red keep remembers weight. Stones keep the shape of old fears. The bay keeps the taste for fire. Under the polite surface, tremor. Under kindness, calculation. Under celebration, cost. Perfume over steel. A garden in fog. A ribbon tied around a ledger. The realm smiled, but trembled. Somewhere a song shifted key. Somewhere a raven reconsidered its route. Somewhere a candle guttered as if it too had been listening softly. In the north, a quiet man smiles with a knife. Chapter 10. Winterfell falls, and a bastard rises. Rescue arrived in a smile that missed the eyes. Ramsay Snow came cloaked in Bolton favor. He promised relief the way a physician promises sleep before a cutting. Theon Greyjoy, already a man arguing with himself in three directions, opened gates because the alternative was admitting there had never been a plan, only swagger and fear. The first siege was improvised. The second was method. Ramsay's men moved like rats that had studied blueprints. They killed neatly, tidying the page. They set careful fires. Rumor did half the work. Winterfell's stones keep heat and history. Smoke mapped new streets for crows. The godswood watched, red leaves trembling. The hall burned, rafters groaned. Snow swallowed what fire left. Theon's ruin completed itself with awful efficiency. Ramsay's hands were clever. Names peeled, memory bent small. He forgot Theon and stopped asking questions. Survivors fled by senses alone. Maester Lewin bled beneath a tree and guided children onward. Bran moved, Rickon held tight, Hodor carried, Osha decided. Wolves threaded the ruin, Ramsay learned Winterfell's corridors as if drawn for him. He found hiding places and removed them as a pelt is pulled free. Then he remade the place. Pit traps, rehearsed screams, cruel feasts. Far north, smoke lies flat. Villages saw a smear and closed doors. News traveled on boots and in short words. Winterfell, they said, and shook their heads. Robb Stark received the news as men receive arrows long in the air. He sat with a letter a long time. Catelyn understood without touching. Council gave him work. They tightened belts on maps and called it strategy. When smoke cleared, Winterfell showed its shape. Ash outlined chairs. A stair collapsed. A gate still swung. Bolton banners came down. Absence remained. The crown wrote Warden of the North beside the name Bolton. Paper crowns weigh little until they cut. The appointment sounded reasonable far away and deranged under northern skies. Policy is often a mask sewn elsewhere. The North wore it and waited to take it off. Reek learned obedience like a burned-in song. He flinched before boots, smiled for no jokes, loved cold because heat meant knives. Sometimes he visited a warm chair in memory. On those days, Ramsay found new rooms to darken. Stories of Theon's crimes outpaced stories of what was done to him. Far away, Sansa heard Winterfell had fallen like a cup breaking in another room. Small folk mended fences with fewer hands and dried meat with fewer roofs. Night snow fell tired. Ravens stood black on white posts like punctuation. In a burned corridor, a small toy turned up intact. In a half-collapsed tower, a gust found a flute and played a thin note. Winterfell did not end. It changed shape and waited. Ramsay, promoted by paper and appetite, smiled what a man should not. He built terror like a system, bribes hinges, secrets locks, flayings keys. The North tolerated him like a body tolerates infection. He mistook tolerance for surrender, silence for praise, a wary bow for a kneel. South of ruin, Robb faced bridges and found them tolling in faces rather than stone. The Frey debt stood across his road, a collection of daughters and dinners, a ledger bound in skin. He had victories to protect and a homeland to honor. He had a heart with its own arithmetic. He had a mother with a memory of guessed right that would not be quieted. He breathed, weighed, and chose. Messages rode to the twins with careful ink, and answers returned slow, wrapped in courtesy that felt like splinters. Frey names were counted again, old promises reread aloud by men who swallowed hard. Catelyn measured seasons left in the war and found fewer than she liked. Robb measured roads and found one narrow, tolling in flesh soon. Snow in ashes, silent gray sky, a hearth gone cold that still remembers warmth. The North steadied itself, which is a slow kind of moving. Wolves trod other paths. Children grew different spines. The wind kept the smell of smoke as if it were a story. Far away, a bridge waited for a bride. A lord waited for apology, and fate sharpened its quill on skins no man should have sold. Robb needs new bridges and pays in oaths. At night, oaths sound different. The candle makes a small stage. The quill moves like a cautious actor. In camps across the riverlands, men remembered words they wished they had not spoken under happier roofs. Guest right sat in memory like a warm coal. Comforting, dangerous to move. Names were counted, debts recited, futures mortgaged. At the twins, terms wore smiles that did not reach the eyes. Daughters stood like doorways, each narrowing when measured. Lords read conditions like weather and argued about cloaks. A promise inked in haste asked patience. Walder Frey asked to be believed at all. The bridges listened. The river remembered. Karstark anger worked a whetstone in the dark. Fathers measured justice differently than kings, and grief argues its own law loudly. Catelyn weighed hearts against maps and found neither willing to give way. In one tent, a young queen held a husband's hand. In another, a queen of duty sat very still and named the cost of love. Far off, a harp tightened strings. Far nearer, a seamstress tightened silk. Between the threads, a different tightening began, quiet as breath held before a vow. A wedding band tightens. Chapter 11. The king in the north, unraveling. Rain worried the canvas like a fretful hand, tapping seams, testing knots that had held through better nights. In Robb's camp, lanterns hung like small, patient stars, their light drifting over wet leather, and maps pricked with pins that now felt more like thorns. The young king, older by miles than by years, stood in the hush between breathe in and breathe out, counting costs the way a steward counts grain, head down, jaw set, hands steady because they must be. Karstark grief arrived before sunrise, already sharpened into vengeance. 2 Lannister boys, hostages, coin meant to buy a softer future, slept like farm sons who believed in mourning. Steel made a quick ledger of their lives. When it was done, nothing in the tent moved but the rain. The killer's eyes held a father's winter. His voice said justice, but his hands said hunger. In the yard, with the host assembled and the north watching, Robb pronounced sentence on a man whose loss he understood too well. He carried out the punishment himself, as his father would have done, as the north expects. Grim law meeting grimer grief. Headsmen are honest in the north. Robb kept that honesty and paid for it in men. The Karstarks walked away, standards drawn down like blinds, leaving a colder wind in the alleys of the army. The hours after justice are rooms with no chairs. Catelyn folded silence like a cloak and wore it beside him. She did not scold. She did not soothe. She simply stayed, which is a kind of courage the bards often forget. Out beyond the ropes, hooves thudded in moss, muffled by the steady drizzle. The cook fires dwindled to red eyes. The banners sighed themselves to sleep. Then the heart knocked, and strategy looked up to find it standing in the door. Whether she is Talisa in the show's warm glow, or Jane in the book's stitches and quiet devotion, the shape is the same. A woman whose hands made hurt smaller when they touched it. Robb married for love and mercy, the 2 softest words in a hard man's mouth. The vow warmed a tent and cooled a realm. Promises to phrase had been written on the night with ink that dries slow and stains forever. By morning, every crow in the Riverlands seemed to know the tale. In council, the great John roared and then drank, and even his laugh sounded careful. Smoljan's eyes took the measure of consequence. Catelyn held the map like a midwife holds a newborn, steady, gentle, fully aware that anything can change in a breath. Oaths, she said without saying it. Bridges, she said, without naming the twins. Honor, she said, meaning both bone and burden. Edmure, dear Edmure, went to his battlements and did a brave wrong thing beautifully. At the ford he had been told to hold. He did more than hold. He won. Arrows rose like statements and fell like applause. The river boiled with broken red and gold. A Lannister column reeled, and the trap Robb had set, the long golden snake he meant to stretch and snap, came apart neatly in Edmure's pride-bright hands. Victory tasted like sweet fruit. Strategy counted pips in the rind and spat them into the mud. There are nights when the rain sounds like a ticking clock. This was one. Grey wind returned late, his muzzle painted with distances. Men spoke softly, as if not to wake the war. Robb wrote letters in a careful hand and sealed them with a seal that seemed heavier tonight. He slept beside a heartbeat he had chosen and woke to the heartbeat of a kingdom that had not chosen him enough. Messages went to the twins with apology folded smooth as linen. A king who had wronged an old house offered a new tie. Edmure for the toll, courtesy for the insult, feast for the bridge. Walder Frey's reply came in a smile that didn't cross his teeth. He would be paid in plate and song, in rings and names, in a dance that made amends where paper could not. Catelyn read the words and felt the thread catch. "We'll go," she said, because the road was a throat and they were already in it. The camp wore patience like an old coat. Men mended straps and stories. The young wolf still drew blood in skirmishes that left the Lannisters sore-footed and careful. But within the circles of victory, smaller circles closed. Stark's empty banners, Edmure's bright arrows, a marriage that sweetened one room and salted 100. Robb stood beneath rain that gathered and slid, and counted tomorrows like a boy counts distant lanterns, hopeful, stubborn, aching. The air itself felt tuned, as if some unseen hand had twisted a peg and made the night hum a half-step lower. Laughter by the cook fires softened, songs shortened. The wind smelling of the river made promises that meant weather and hinted at fate. In a hall to the south, plates were being polished with unusual attention. Instruments were being tuned past perfection, past pride. Catelyn prayed in the plain woman's way. No bargains, only mercy if it can be spared. The gods listened with wooden faces. Somewhere a drummer tried a soft roll and smiled at how it carried. Music will start. Doors will close. Chapter 12. The Red Wedding. The twins looked like an argument the river was tired of losing. Torchlight pouted in the narrow windows. Rain braided itself into the ropes. The bridges lay across the current like old men who had agreed to be useful if respected. Robb arrived with banners wet and honest, with a tired hope folded small enough to hide under his cuff. Catelyn rode beside him, her spine a straight line drawn through years that wanted to bend her. Walder Frey's greeting was a thing crafted for guests who had something to apologize for. He offered bread and salt with all the ceremony of a sigh. Guest Right walked in ahead of everyone, sat at the head table, and nodded at every cup. The old man smiled the way a lock smiles at a key it plans not to recognize. His sons wore faces that practiced at politeness. His daughters stood like doors that might open, might not. Edmure's shame was dressed in a bridal veil. When it lifted, what looked like penalty tasted like reprieve. Rosalind's hands trembled in a brave way. Edmure's mouth softened. Laughter arrived shyly, then stayed. Meat steamed, butter apologized and melted. Musicians tuned and made small, bright faces at one another. The room exhaled as if unfastening a bodice after too long a march. Catelyn counting knives and noticing mail and marking exits as only mothers and foxes do, let her mouth loosen the smallest fraction. Perhaps the river would accept this toll. Perhaps the bridge would bear them kinder on the way back. Then a fiddle sang a strain that did not belong to celebration. Not louder, closer. The tune wound under spoons and around ankles, threading itself into waistbands and chair legs, making itself familiar as a heartbeat, inevitable as breathing. Catelyn's fingers went to her sleeves. The hairs along her arms rose like a field before storm. Her eyes found what her bones had already named: steel where silk should be, cold where warmth had been rehearsed. The first wound is often quiet in a hall like that. Robb looked down as if someone had adjusted his cloak without permission. Then noise arrived, late and oversupplied. Benches scraping, women crying from somewhere very far away and very near, men shouting directions no longer attached to sense. The music did not stop. It changed. The room remembered it had walls. Arrows wrote fast, short sentences around the rafters. Knives went about their work with the hurry of boys told to clean up before father comes home. Guest Right bled out on the tablecloth and did not get back up. A cup spilled without shattering. A dog barked once and then watched. Catelyn bargained with her last coin and found the market closed. Love, shouted at a blade, does not turn it. She had always known this. She tried anyway. That is what mothers do when the hour is unkind. Grey Wind died in the yard twice over, once by the closing of doors, once by the bolts. He was the map of a king's heart. Maps burn fast and thorough. Outside, the rain thickened. The roofs leaned over to watch. Inside, a drum beat a beat that would never end in the north. Robb's life let go with the dignity of silence. Catelyn's ended like a prayer dropped into deep water. Bubbles, ripples, then the surface making its old face again. When the noise finally wandered off to find a different room, the hall became a smell: smoke, iron, wet wool, fat cooling. A girl wiped a plate because wiping is what plates ask. Even after the world's hour, a boy picked up a fallen cup and held it as if it might explain something. The candles hissed at their own puddles and then stood steady. Outside, the river recommitted to movement. Movement is its creed, old and absolute. Word rides faster than ghosts. It crossed fields on hooves and coats, ran down the throats of men who needed to say it to believe it, perched on chimney smoke in villages where bread was half the day's limit and tears the other half. In Winterfell's ruins, wind carried it from stone to stone. In the Dreadfort, someone smiled carefully. In King's Landing, some faces learned how not to smile too quickly. The North remembers, but remembrance is not reply. Not yet. Memory must be forged into something heavier than grief, carried by shoulders that are still growing. That night, remembrance looked like women staring at doors that would be empty a long time. It sounded like men saying names to the floor. It felt like blankets pulled over heads while the mind refused to sleep. In the morning, banners sagged and would not rise fully, as if ashamed to pretend. The river did not bow. It moved on, wide and uninterested, carrying rumors and splinters and the kind of story a traveler can tell in one sentence to get a bed. A candle snuffed, a river moving on. Across the sea wind, a king chokes on purple. Chapter 13. The Purple Wedding. The Fall of Tywin's House. King's Landing loves a show. Weddings are civic theater. Perfume on politics. Sugar on steel. The day arrived gleaming. Pies baked to brag. Fountains chattering. Musicians in fine livery playing notes that had never seen night watch. Marjorie floated like a promise framed in piety. Cersei glittered like a warning lacquered with mother. Joffrey sat where all could see him and behaved as if air was something lesser beings should filter for him. Tyrion, scar a new signature, watched and counted exits. The only prayer he trusts. The cup, the cough, the color. That is how the tale will travel. A king drinks. A boy indulges himself on a stage too large for anyone his age. He points, mocks, orders. Then the throat locks. The face purples with a color no court tailor will ever match. The eyes bulge as if to escape their host. The courtyard learns how quickly spectacle becomes autopsy. People move with the bright relief of purpose discovered in panic. Cersei's scream finds a spear point and hurls itself at Tyrion. The dwarf holds a cup, gravity's cruel joke, and so a city chooses a villain. In the scramble, Sansa is moved like a chess piece off the board. Varys loosens a string. Littlefinger tightens one. The Queen of Thorns picks a petal from a secret. Later, torches. Trial. Tyrion alone under flames that make every face a judgment. Witnesses arrive rehearsed and leave rewarded. Shay's absence aches. Then her presence turns worse than pain. Tyrion's speech lands like thunder. Not persuasive, but permanent. He demands combat because there is at least a rule to it. The gods send Oberyn Martell, who wants justice and revenge to rhyme. Across a bright day of clashing, the spear flies with poetry, and then the mountain speaks in prose. The skull breaks the song. Tyrion lives to be sentenced anyway, the gods approving of twist, the father approving of ledger. Up a tower, where power goes to hide its breath, a son takes a crossbow to a father who has mistaken fear for obedience. Tywin Lannister, victor of ledgers, arranger of chairs, sits where even kings become human. The words fail, the bolts don't. The first makes a truth, the second makes a legend. There are no trumpets. There is a curtain's sigh, a window's indifferent star. Varys hears how quiet sounds when it stops caring and packs for elsewhere. Jaime and Cersei touch old sins and find the hinges still oiled. Sansa looks at the sea without seeing it. Littlefinger tutors horizon. Tywin's fall is measured not in wails, but in recalculations. Cloth does not mourn. Men beneath it do briskly with quills. Coin will keep. Soldiers will march. Courtiers will gossip. Bakeries will forget to salt one day's bread. But something central has been removed, and the building must learn to balance again with a sway it never admitted it had. Joffrey's end makes room for a kinder failure. Tommen's crown sits on smaller weather. Marjorie adjusts her smile by a single note. Cersei tightens rage into policy. Tyrion disappears into the gears of escape, leaving a hole that family stories will spend years falling through. If you pressed your ear to the stone that night, you could hear the Red Keep remember to breathe without the man who had taught it a rhythm. It did not breathe better, it breathed differently. With lions sated, a stag limps north. Chapter 14. Stannis in the ashes. Blackwater's green memory clung like smoke on wool. On Dragonstone, defeat did not sand Stannis down. It polished his edges. He paced halls carved like dragon ribs, a man who believes that law is a ladder even when the rung cracks under his foot. Davos kept an honest lantern at his side. Melisandre made the walls flutter with shadow sermons, her certainty a red road unspooling into the dark. Names went to fire the way nets go to sea. Robb, Balon, Joffrey, leech blood hissing like punctuation. When each fell elsewhere by other hands, faith knocked at Stannis' door and asked to be believed. He refused the perfume of prophecy and accepted its arithmetic. Davos, who trusts soup more than visions, taught letters to Shireen in a room untouched by war, and for a time even Stannis' crown looked steadier in a father's silhouette. But the realm prefers music that flatters. Stannis is a drumbeat, so he sought the one temple that respects unlovely necessities, the Iron Bank. In Braavos, coin is winter made tidy. Clerks measured him the way frost measures crops. He offered inevitability as collateral. Davos offered conviction wrapped in callous. Numbers nodded, sails mended. An unloved king bought time from a house that sells it. A letter from the wall arrived like a bare branch through snow. It named what Melisandre had always sung in flame, and what Davos had always grumbled in fish, a cold that will not negotiate. Stannis turned north, trading claim for care, because saving the realm is the only argument that ever convinced him to keep breathing. Ships beat up the narrow sea, oars ticking like metronomes, frost lacing rails with honest lace. At the wall, wind gives orders. Stannis arrived with banners that mean little to men who measure truth by survival. He came as cavalry with timing, as law with fire, as competence without flirtation. The wildlings learned the price of rushing a prepared line. Jon Snow found in Stannis a father of the lean kind. The answer is work. The reward is permission to keep doing it. For a breath, the king fit the fable. Stern, fair enough, unwilling to smile where a command would do. He parceled castles like teeth along a jaw, chewed on northern loyalties with a locked bite, gathered small houses, old grudges, swords too proud to rust. Davos told truth. Stannis accepted it the way a miser pays for boots that last. Each night, Melisandre read the flames. Each morning, Davos counted bread. Between them, Stannis chose the later good. As always, saved first, ruled after. When letters came like flurries, news of chairs and the little storms that circled them, Stannis burned what he did not need and pocketed what he did. He would go to Winterfell with a story the North might believe, law restored by marching, safety returned by structure. The calendar said no, stubbornness redrew it, hooves replaced oars. The line of the wall thinned behind them. Wolves watched. Rumors of flayed men grinned from the snow. Frost whistled on a black beach. Oars had kept time. Now the wind would. The king who had never begged love asked for something colder and sturdier. Endurance. And beyond the wall, a new war waits. Chapter 15. The North. Rewritten. Boltons and snow. Paper made a crown that cut. In the capital, a quill wrote, Warden of the North, beside a name the North did not love, and the ravens carried that cold decree into rooms warmed by peat. The letters arrived before the men, and by the time the men came, the ink had already burned a neat hole in the old map. Winterfell lifted a new banner over Old Stone. The flayed man's grin was not a smile. It was a diagram of threat. Ramsay walked the corridors as if he had found his childhood in their shadows and meant to keep it there. Reek trailed him, eyes lowered, breath measured, to please Boots. The hearth tried to remember warmth. Smoke thinned, embarrassed. The North bowed because it must, not because it wished to. Oaths are winter coats. You wear the ones you have when cold arrives faster than a tailor. Little houses sent grain, sons, the reluctant courtesy of attendants. Great houses practiced the old art of waiting. Polite faces, private ledgers. A new etiquette took root. How to nod at cruelty without endorsing it. How to keep a name clean while a hand soil slicks a goblet. In the Vale, a girl learned a new face. Sansa became Elaine and practiced vanishing in plain sight. Littlefinger taught her the grammar of rooms, where to stand, to be forgotten, how to speak, so the silence afterward does the work. In fresh snow, she built a Winterfell of memory and understood the ache of choosing not to cry when someone smashed it. Cut with the Dreadford's careful horrors, her lessons read like a mirror held to two futures, a woman building herself, a man unbuilding another. Roosa moved ambition like ice under snow, quiet, inexorable. Ramsay courted the North with flayings and thoughtful gifts, marrying as told, smiling with a hunter's lip. Letters went out like winter birds that have learned not to sing. Lion seals, rose seals, river sigils still smelling of ash. In kitchens, pies cooled with complicated histories. In halls, oaths were spoken with careful enunciation and careful emptiness. Ravens perched on frostbit letters. Peat smoke rose thread-thin. Manderley feasts tasted of double meanings. The Umbers drank statements. Carhold's echoes belonged to new owners with old enemies. Scargos kept its counsel where waves have teeth. Between keeps, riders learned routes with more eyes than words. In barns, old shields were mended beside new ones polished too bright. The Crown believed ink could anchor allegiance at winter's latitude. The North put the paper in a box labeled later and buried it where the ground remembers. Sansa's mask thickened into a tool she could take off and on. She practiced kindness like a weapon that wounds no one and changes everything. She learned that pity spent inaccurately is treason against oneself. Reek practiced names like rungs on a ladder. Theon, splintered wood that still holds if you trust it exactly so. In the Dreadfort, a laugh arrived a second before pain, and that second is how a man begins to measure his soul. Bolton dinners were quiet unless the host wanted noise. Knives sounded bright. Wine apologized to wood. Servants moved like ink across decrees. A smile might be a trial, a cough, a sentence. Beneath the careful horror, the structure creaked. Cruelty is a poor manager. Roosa knew and pretended not to. The North knew and pretended to learn. Winter pressed two fingers through every shutter. Grain bins preached truer sermons than septons. Men who had bent professionally discovered spines when children coughed. Women who had bowed at noon stood at midnight and wrapped decisions in shawls. The Boltons mistook this quiet for consent. Consent is louder than that when it exists. Old songs found new keys in frozen yards. Names were sifted from ash and kneaded into bread so they could be eaten and remembered. A boy mended a net and whispered oaths into the twine, not to catch fish, but to catch a future. A girl touched a knife's edge without pushing, wanting to know shape, not taste. The North's memory fattened by fasting. Paper crowns, wardens named by quills, seals broke. Cold came in with each letter. The wax smelled of gardens that do not grow here. The ink carried no peat. The penalties read like weather reports from another sky. The North bowed because it must, and then, in the quiet afterward, stood as it could. Sansa looked down from height and smiled with her own teeth. Reek looked up from depth and tested a rung. Snow fell between them, steady as prayer. Plans were laid in whispers that sounded like sleep. Quiet men met quietly, quiet women met quieter. The last king, still breathing winter air, marched on a road that bent toward Winterfell. Far off, wolves lifted their heads. Far nearer, a candle guttered and steadied, stubborn as breath on a cold morning. The last king still breathes winter air. Chapter 16. The Last Charge of Stannis Baratheon. Snow arrived like a decision no council had voted on. At first, it dusted the tents and softened the ruts, polite as lace on mail. By the second day, it thickened into a wall that kept stepping forward. Landmarks dissolved. Horses blew steam and turned into ghosts. A man could see his own hand and not the spear beside it. The king kept the line moving because lines were what he trusted. Castles allotted, fords counted, banners arranged. The road to Winterfell penciled through the blank. The storm erased the pencil with a wet sleeve and laughed without a mouth. Fires ate their own shadows. Flames hunched, blew at the core, and then failed. Sparks leapt and disappeared, as if the air refused to remember them. Men learned the new arithmetic of cold. Fingers, then tools, toes, then balance, hope, then speech. Orders had to be shouted into cloth and still reached ears as rumors. Drums died first, horns next, songs last. A horse would step forward and be gone, swallowed by a gust the eye could not admit was there. Stannis looked into that white and imagined a ledger, the columns filled with costs that did not care how neatly he kept them. Davos moved along the line with a stubborn light that was not fire. He wrapped boys in plain words and pulled them up from the snow's soft invitations. He told the truth to the king in handfuls that could be swallowed. Carts stuck, oats near spent, shoe leather shrinking into men's mouths, scouts circling back with frost on beards and nothing useful in their hands. Melisandre stood at the skirts of each fire like a red answer waiting to be asked. Her eyes measured the storm as if it were a letter from a god. When she spoke of victory, the snow listened the way stone listens, present, unmoved. The line shortened without orders. Companies that had set out as paragraphs dwindled to fragments. Squires soldiered. Captains counted the faces that counted on them and learned new numbers. The baggage was cut down to the bone, and then to the idea of bone. A black mare stumbled, thrashed, and stilled. Another horse took the load as if accepting a crown no one wanted. Men tied rope from waist to waist, lifelines that rang when the wind plucked them. The march became a blind conversation. Tug, pause, answer. Stannis did not shorten his stride. He believed that walking through a problem remained walking, and eventually there would be the other side. The last night before the sight of walls, the camp was a parish of small flames, each with its congregation of hands. Fires ate their own shadows again and again. Sleep came in brittle shards. A drummer held sticks he did not raise. The king wrote, folded, and put away a page with no seal, as if saving the letter for a day that would never arrive. Dawn did not so much break as withdraw. Winterfell's banners appeared, flayed men smiling their old diagrammed threat, and the storm, satisfied that it had done its part, leaned back to watch. Steel met banners of flayed men because there was nothing honest left except the meeting. Stannis set what remained with the stubborn courtesy that had always governed him. Lines formed, wavered, formed again, like handwriting in a moving wagon. Bolton riders came sure-footed, their horses shod to the country, their cloaks cut to this particular cruelty. The first impact sounded like a book slammed shut in an empty library. Then the rest of the shelves fell. Snow leapt, steam rose, men vanished into it as if the page had rejected ink. It was not a long battle. The cold had already fought half of it. Shields turned into tables, into sleds, into doors that the wind shut. Spear points found numb flesh that could not flinch correctly anymore. Davos's voice traveled less far each minute. Melisandre's certainty did not heat a single blade. The king's axe bit like an argument that refuses to end. Men fell and looked offended that falling had chosen them in particular. Others stood by habit rather than hope, near a small stand of dark trees. Stannis found the circle that battles sometimes grant to those they mean to end, a space just wide enough to be himself. He used it cleanly. He cut men who deserved cutting, and some who did not, because the hour no longer interviewed. He took a slice to the thigh and rejected its advice. He lost his horse and chose not to notice. He breathed in slow, practical pieces, as if the air were another duty to be met. The snow found his beard and kept it. The ring closed by degrees. A voice offered terms that did not include the words he served. Stannis answered with the economy that had made him spare with smiles and generous with burdens. He named nothing. He refused to kneel to a grammar he did not recognize. He set his back to a tree that had watched older winters and raised his sword as if the cold itself had asked a question he knew how to answer. Steel, breath, white. The syllables were brief. The sentence was complete. Around him, the camp finished turning into a graveyard. Those who could walk did so toward silence. Those who could not joined it. Fires guttered and curled into their pits, sleeping like animals in burrows. A standard lay half-buried, its colors muted to memory, its pole a finger pointing nowhere. The wind passed through torn canvas and broken hoops, and through the mouths of men who would not speak again, and the sound it made was a hymn without words. Stannis fell to silence, not because he had run out of reasons, but because a life built on refusal has no softer ending to give. Later, the snow performed its old office. It covered the living and the dead impartially. It covered roads until they were guesses, names until they were shapes, lessons until they were stories. In another season, travelers would pause by that stand of trees and feel a sober stillness they could not name. For now, the storm tied it away, the evidence of an unbending will that finally met a material it could not move. A standard lay buried in white. The wind kept singing. The hymn did not change its tune. No drums remembered the king's name. A standard buried in snow. The wind's final hymn. In Pike's halls, one more tide goes out. Chapter 17. The iron price unpaid. The sea wrote the day in gray. Swell shouldered the rocks. Rain penciled in the margins. Pike rose from the foam with its old indifference. Bridges slung between fangs of stone. Ropes gone slick as eels. Balon Greyjoy chose to walk where men younger than he would have waited. Pride in him had always preferred wind to roof. He stepped onto the swaying way with a mariner's memory and a father's contempt for caution. Below, the surf practiced its applause. The storm kept its own counsel. It tightened ropes and licked spray across the cliff faces. Balon moved not quickly, but with the stubborn rhythm of a tide. A gust shouldered him. He set his feet and gave the wind a look that had once frightened other men. The rope sang an old note and then a surprising one. The bridge jolted like a fish remembering it is strong. The king of salt and rock reached for the next hold and found only air. Pride fell faster than men think it can. The sea opened its mouth and closed it. The old man's last crossing was downward. On Pike's steps, servants learned how to make their faces appropriate to the hour. Priests prepared the old words and the old water. Asha listened for the shape of the future in the sound of rain on slate. Theon's name hovered in rooms that still pretended not to speak it. The drowned god received Balon with the same ceremony it offers to everybody. An intake, a pause, a return. No crown, no coin, only salt. The islands grieved like cliffs grieve, by standing. The Ironborn had tasted the green coasts and found them filling but indigestible. Garrisons thinned under northern pressure and southern retribution. Longships returned lower in the water, not because of plunder, but because of the wet weariness that rides home with tired men. Captains who had named themselves Terror now named the wind Prudence and waited for better weathers. The quiet order went out along the chain of rocks. Pull back, hold fast. count oars, mend nets, pikes' forges cooled to a reasonable glow. The Isles remembered how to live on themselves. Ravens from the mainland brought news salted with contempt, wolves scattering raiders, lions tidying coasts, Boltons writing their paper crowns to the shoreline and calling it policy. The Ironborn heard veiled insults and hid their smiles. The Greenlands had grown expensive. Even a raider understands markets. Nets are also profit. Saltfish pay for children the way silver once paid for glory. Men who had been boys at Balon's first rebellion learned to speak in yields and currents. Songs still bragged, ledgers spoke louder. On the quays, lanterns swung like patient thoughts. Nights smelled of tar, wet rope, and old victories relieved of duty. In the alehouses, stories shortened. Pride took smaller cups. Asha drew maps that began and ended at harbors the islands could keep. Old captains pretended their bones ached and left the proving to nephews. Priests gave drownings unhurriedly, bringing men back with more cough than zeal. The Isles shifted from reach to root, from summer riot to winter thrift. The change made less song but more soup. Then a rumor arrived ahead of sails, light as a gull's laugh and twice as mocking. Euron had come back, the crow's eye with a pocket full of far places and a smile that treated rules as rumors. He stepped onto Pike like a man disembarking from his own legend. He had the sea's habit of taking without apology and the traveler's trick of making theft sound like insight. He named the drowned god with courtesy and invited men to imagine larger gods who make larger promises if paid in larger coins. His words were tides. They pulled. Some rocks moved. He spoke of ships stitched into monsters, of horns that teach dragons manners, of a throne across the narrow water that would suit a kraken if only the kraken would dare to be ridiculous. Asha measured him with the same scale she used on storms. Not can we stop it, but can we avoid being foolish while it spends itself? Some captains leaned forward, eyes shiny with the possibility of again. Others leaned back toward their nets. Theon's name passed like a shadow. Some spoke it with pity, some with contempt, many with the careful blankness that spares families from choosing which wound to display. His story had become a cautionary lantern hung at harbor mouths. Boys pointed at it and swore they would never run aground where he had, and then went to sea anyway because boys must test water to believe in it. Balon lay in a salt hall for a day and a night, and the water said nothing new. The King's Moot would speak instead, that old island parliament where wind and boast do half the voting. Before it gathered, Ironborn work resumed in the way that honorably ignores grief. Line mended, hook sharpened, plank pitched, sail checked for tiers that could widen at the wrong gust. The people did what they had always done when the world wrote a new line. They kept the previous chapter's tools sharp. On distant shores, abandoned holdfasts learned new names. In the north, a quiet law hardened against raiders. In the Westerlands, coastal villages made new bells. In the Reach, watchtowers watched. The old dream of owning the Greenlands like a freshly captured ship sat on the waterline and leaked. Captains, once poets of fire, practiced the prose of repair. Children learned to sleep to the sound of surf instead of screams. The islands shook off the last bright illusions like water off an oilskin and looked at the sea the way farmers look at fields, with respect and expectation, not hunger alone. At night, lanterns swung in sea mist, each a small moon with a job. Surf counted breaths against the sea walls. Priests muttered the same plain benedictions over catch and corpse. Asha stood on a parapet and watched the distance for the shape of a sail that meant family or future. Euron's name rode the wind, amused, promising, dangerous, a kind of weather. The islands listened because even the prudent must listen to storms. They did not yet answer. They made themselves ready to. Nets hung to dry like gray flags. The tide lifted everything with its old impartial arm. Balon's last crossing stayed a lesson because the sea insists. Rope and storm do not care for epilogues. The Ironborn stepped back from the Greenlands, not as sensible ones who preferred their own beds to other people's ashes. The Kraken blinked, yawned, and sank a little deeper. On the beaches, children learned knots from mothers, while fathers watched the sky. A gull laughed and did not explain why. Somewhere beyond sight, a horn the islands did not own gave a single patient note and waited, lantern swinging in sea mist, surf counting breaths. What remains of a war that's ended? Epilogue. The war that broke the realm. Maps remember the world as if events were steady things, but even parchment shows its creases. When you roll it open, the rivers seem to hesitate, the roads to wonder whether they still connect what they once pledged to. The 7 kingdoms lie there like a patient, breathing in sleep, chest rising, chest falling, new scars tight across old muscle. The torches are low, the scribes are drowsy. We whisper the summary so the realm can rest. 5 kings lit their names and then went out by different doors. Renly, green as spring's promise, was unmade by a shadow that wore his brother's will. His camp folded like a festival retreating from rain. His banners slumped like closing eyelids, and learned that charisma is a torch wind loves to test. Robb, the young wolf, rose clean from northern snow and fell at a feast that remembered its right to betray. A song stole the air from the room, and the north could only memorize the absence. Balon, who loved rope more than law, stepped into a gust and let the sea keep him. Stannis, the tireless drumbeat, marched into a white that did not care to listen, and the snow laid a lid over him. Joffrey, purple with petulance even in death, met a justice that tasted like wedding wine, and Tommen, the crown that followed, sat very still and tried to be good, the sort of good that pleases candles and terrifies wolves. That is the ledger of ends, but the account carries forward, line after line. In the north, flayed men rewrote etiquettes that had never needed ink. Winterfell, burned and relit under hands that did not love it, learned to keep secrets the way a body keeps heat. Villages traded children's laughter for caution, then traded caution for hunger, and then tried to trade hunger for anything at all. The riverlands hollowed like an old loaf, crusts of keeps, airy nothing where grain once was. Ferrymen counted coins that did not fit the old weights. Farmers looked at furrows as if they were letters they had forgotten how to read. The crown learned that debts are wars with better stationery. Counting houses rang with a music that could not be danced to. Soldiers who had eaten campaign bread tasted court sweetmeats and could not decide which had felt more honest. Faith, roses, and lions tied themselves together in a knot that looked like grace from far away and like strangling from up close. The Tyrells carried bread and smiles and made a pillow of the city's fear. The Lannisters wore triumph like a coat they dared not take off because the room felt colder when they tried. The Faith learned to count men as well as sins. In small rooms behind altars, old books found new readings. In large rooms before thrones, new edicts tried on old armor. The realm grew polite at the edges and sharp in the middle. Children, watching from stairwells, learned many ways to bow and only a few to breathe. And yet even in the breakage sprouts. In a windowless house across the water, a girl curated faces until her own became a tool. At first she whispered names like prayers. Later, silence served better. In an eastern city, a queen fed dragons on her fear until fear learned to fear her. She tested chains until they snapped, then learned that freedom has tasks that look like chains if you squint. Across frozen stone, a watch without numbers watched again and found it could still stand. The wall did not care for kings. It cared for storms. Far south, ships trimmed to promises left harbors with decks that smelled of new paint and old lies. The next weather was assembling. Look again at the 5 who taught the realm how loudly ambition can sleepwalk. Renly showed the seduction of ease. Banners like lanterns, tents like poems, a kingdom gathered by laughter. He left a sweetness that turned bitter quickly in the mouths of those who had trusted taste over table. Robb proved victory is a poor tutor. He won enough to become mortal. His justice cost him men. His love cost him bridges. His honor cost him the rest. Yet songs still straighten when they say his name, because the North wears grief as a garment it will not sell. Balon showed that stubbornness can be a raft and a rock. He brought his people home to eat what the sea offers, not crowns, but sustenance. His end was not defeat, so much as punctuation. Stannis, austere and exact, proved that a law unloved is still a law. He saved a realm he could not get to love him back, and spent himself trying anyway. Joffrey proved that crowns do not teach manners. His end was a relief that tasted like sin. Tommen, quiet and dutiful, tried to be a hinge between rooms that refused to share a door frame. The balance sheet runs longer than a night watchman's patience. Northern clans learned to talk in the voices of old men while their hands were still young. The Riverlands replaced crops with stories about crops and called it hope. The Reach smiled politely while it moved grain like armies. King's Landing smoothed its hair and turned its face to any sun that promised warmth. Across it all, ravens kept going. Wing, ink, repeat. When the birds rested, the letters kept their own counsel. There were other accountings. Children became hard in shapes that would have shocked their grandfathers and pleased their enemies. Widows learned numbers more reliable than mercy. Bastards found their surnames heavier or lighter depending on who was counting. Sellswords discovered the comfort of steady roofs. Lords discovered the discomfort of steady clerks. The songs improved and the bread sometimes did not. And always, somewhere, a market square put itself back together. A fishmonger tried a joke. A child held up a carved horse. A thief decided this was a poor place to practice, and the day remembered how to be a day. From the wreckage, seeds for the next storms. A girl with many faces learning which are safe to wear and which are only disguises. A queen with dragons learning when fire is a cure and when it is a confession. A knight with no dawn rehearsing beyond the trees, impatient with thrones that cannot see it. In the Vale, a red-haired apprentice to survival learning the mathematics of smiles. On the Iron Islands, a laugh on the wind hinting at maps the realm has not yet seen. In Bravos, ledgers sharpening their quills, men in black counting arrows, women in gray counting children. Somewhere a smith teaching a boy to name metals by sound as much as by shine. Somewhere else, an old woman showing a girl how to bind a book so that pages do not escape in wind. Night always returns to the war room. The pins come out of the map. The banners are rolled. The braziers camped. A steward sweeps chalk from a floor, no longer listing armies. The air smells faintly of tallow and solved problems, which is to say of problems that will arrive later wearing new boots. A last cup is poured and left unfinished. In the rookery, ravens turn on their bars, not as omen, but as habit. If you listen carefully, you can hear the realm snore, then sigh, then settle. It is still here. It is always more here than its kings. Sleep then to the soft grammar of consequence. Maps rolled and tied, halls swept, braziers cooling to ash. Remember the five and how each taught the realm a lesson it would rather not have learned. Renly, charm without weight. Robb, honor that forgets how hungry oaths are. Balon, hunger that forgets who must eat tomorrow. Stannis, duty without music. Joffrey, power without adulthood. And Tommen, the small kindness that tried to hold back a tide with cupped hands and only managed to get wet. Remember what the wars took and what they planted in the ground without asking permission. If these quiet histories helped you drift, feel free to subscribe or tell a friend who needs softer nights that there is a place to be carried by gentle wars and kinder voices. Tell me where you're listening from when morning finds you. We will turn another map some other evening and let its rivers sing. For now, close your eyes, let the wind in the trees along the trident hush the last questions, and give your thoughts back to sleep. Rest now. The ravens are quiet.